The blood on the autumn leaves was still warm when William Clearwater's weathered hands stopped mid-reach for his walking stick. His coffee thermos slipped from trembling fingers, shattering against the rocky trail as the agonized cry of a trapped animal echoed through the Colorado pines, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his days. This wasn't the usual deer caught in fencing that he'd grown accustomed to rescuing around his remote mountain cabin. Margaret's old medical bag tumbled from his shoulder as Bill stumbled backward, his 67-year-old heart hammering against his ribs. The massive steel jaws of an illegal leg-hold trap gleamed in the morning sunlight, and caught within them was a 400-pound American black bear, its dark eyes filled with a pain so human it made Bill's breath catch. 3 years of grief had taught him that some mornings change everything. Some rescues bring back the dead. "Dear God," he whispered, recognizing something impossibly familiar in those desperate, intelligent eyes. "What have they done to you?" Time was running out, and Bill Clearwater was the bear's only hope. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, William Bill Clearwater had been a different man. At 67, the retired veterinarian still carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent 40 years healing broken things, though his own heart remained stubbornly shattered. The mountain cabin he shared with ghosts sat 45 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by towering pines and the kind of silence that either heals you or drives you mad. Margaret had been gone 3 years now. 3 years since cancer had stolen his wife of 42 years, leaving behind only her reading glasses on the kitchen table and a stack of hand-drawn blueprints for something called Margaret's Haven Wildlife Rescue Center. Bill kept those blueprints in the top drawer of her desk, unable to throw them away but too heartbroken to look at them. Their shared dream felt as dead as she was. The cabin itself was a testament to stubborn independence. Bill had built most of it with his own hands in 1981, back when his knees didn't creak and his daughter Clara still thought he hung the moon. Now the place felt too big and too empty, filled with medical debt notices and foreclosure warnings that Bill pretended not to see. The bank wanted $40,000 he didn't have, and his pride wouldn't let him ask Clara for help. Clara Thompson Clearwater lived 2 hours away in Denver, where she worked double shifts as a nurse to support herself and her teenage son Tyler after her divorce. At 54, she carried the weight of being a single mother with the additional burden of watching her father slowly disappear into grief and isolation. Their phone calls had become monthly obligations filled with careful politeness and unspoken resentment. "Dad, you can't keep living up there alone," she'd said during their last conversation. "What if something happens? What if you fall or have another episode with your blood pressure?" Her voice carried that particular exhaustion of adult children who've become parents to their own parents. Bill's response was always the same: "I'm not dead yet, honey. Your mother and I built this place to last." But privately, in the dark hours before dawn, when grief felt heaviest, Bill wondered if Clara was right. His arthritis made morning chores harder each year. The isolation that had once felt like peaceful solitude now stretched like a canyon between him and the rest of the world. Some days he caught himself talking to Margaret's photograph, asking her forgiveness for not being strong enough to fulfill their dreams. The veterinary supplies in his garage were covered in dust, remnants of his practice that he couldn't bring himself to donate or sell. His emergency medical kit still rode in the back of his pickup truck, a habit from decades of house calls that he maintained out of muscle memory rather than necessity. Margaret used to say that every creature deserved a second chance, just like people did. Bill was beginning to wonder if second chances were real or just something hopeful people told themselves when the first chance had gone so terribly wrong. The discovery came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. Bill had been following his usual morning routine: black coffee, check the weather, walk the perimeter of his property to ensure no hunters or trespassers had left their mark on his land. The autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the aspen leaves painted the mountainside in brilliant gold against the dark green of the pines. He first noticed the blood about a quarter-mile from the cabin, dark droplets splattered across fallen leaves in a pattern that spoke of struggle and desperation. His veterinary training kicked in automatically. This wasn't the random scatter of a successful hunt, but the deliberate trail of something fighting for its life. The drops were still warm to the touch, which meant whatever was bleeding was still alive, still suffering. The animal's cries reached him before he saw the source. Low, keening sounds that seemed to come from the very soul of the creature making them. Bill had heard thousands of animals in distress over his career, but this was different. These weren't just cries of pain, they were cries of defeat, the sound something makes when it has given up hope. Following the blood trail through a stand of pine trees, Bill found himself in a small clearing where the morning sun filtered through the canopy in cathedral-like shafts of light. And there, chained to the massive trunk of an old-growth pine, was the largest black bear he had ever seen outside of a zoo. The bear was caught in what appeared to be a military-grade leg-hold trap, the kind that had been illegal in Colorado for over a decade. The steel jaws had clamped down on the animal's right hind leg with such force that bone was visible through the mangled flesh. A heavy chain connected the trap to the tree, giving the bear maybe 6 feet of movement in any direction, enough space to exhaust itself trying to escape, but not enough to find shelter or water. Bill estimated the bear had been trapped for at least 2 days, based on the wear patterns in the dirt where it had paced and struggled. The animal was dehydrated, exhausted, and showing early signs of infection around the wound. Its thick black coat was matted with blood and debris, and flies had already begun to gather around the injury. What struck Bill most was the bear's eyes. Instead of the wild, panicked look he expected from a trapped animal, there was something almost human in that gaze: intelligence, resignation, and what he could only describe as disappointment. When the bear noticed Bill's approach, it didn't rear up or attempt to charge despite its restraints. Instead, it watched him with a steady, measuring stare that made Bill's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. There was something familiar about those eyes, though Bill couldn't place what it was. The bear had a distinctive, heart-shaped scar on its chest, pale against the dark fur, the kind of mark that comes from surgery rather than injury. Something about that scar tugged at his memory, but the urgency of the situation pushed the thought aside. Bill's first instinct was to call for help, but his cell phone showed no signal, a common problem this deep in the mountains. His satellite phone was back at the cabin, a 20-minute hike through rough terrain. The bear didn't have 20 minutes to spare, not with the way infection was already setting in around the wound. The ethical dilemma hit him immediately. Approaching a trapped, wild animal, especially one this size, was extraordinarily dangerous. Black bears typically weighed between 200 and 400 pounds, and even injured, this one could easily kill him with a single swipe of its massive paws. The rational thing to do would be to return to the cabin, call the authorities, and let them handle the situation with proper equipment and personnel. But Bill had spent 40 years as a veterinarian, and 40 years had taught him to recognize when an animal was dying. The bear's breathing was shallow and irregular, its gums were pale from blood loss, and the smell of infection was already noticeable even from several feet away. By the time help arrived, it would be too late. Margaret's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, words she had spoken countless times during their years of practice together. "Every creature deserves a second chance, Bill. Sometimes we're the only second chance they're going to get." The weather forecast had called for storms later in the day, which would make any rescue attempt exponentially more difficult. The temperature was dropping, and hypothermia would compound the bear's existing injuries. Bill realized with a cold certainty that if he walked away now, he would be walking away from a death sentence. He set down his walking stick and began unpacking the emergency veterinary kit that still rode in his backpack, a habit from decades of house calls that he had never quite managed to break. The first challenge was gaining the bear's trust, or at least its tolerance. Bill had sedated wild animals before, but never under these circumstances. Alone, without backup, with a creature that outweighed him by 200 pounds and had every reason to see him as a threat. He moved slowly, talking in the same gentle voice he had used with frightened animals for 4 decades. "Easy there, big fellow," he murmured, crouching about 10 feet from the trapped bear. "I know you're hurting, I know you're scared, but I'm here to help, not hurt." The bear's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and those intelligent dark eyes never left his face. Bill had the strangest sensation that the animal was listening, actually understanding his words. The emergency tranquilizer in his kit was designed for dogs and cats, not 400-pound bears. Bill did quick calculations in his head, estimating dosage based on body weight and the animal's obvious state of distress. Too little, and the bear would remain dangerous to work with. Too much, and he could stop its heart entirely. With hands that trembled only slightly, he loaded the injection gun with what he hoped was the right amount. The approach took 15 agonizing minutes. Each step forward was measured and deliberate, with Bill talking constantly to keep the bear calm. When he was finally close enough to see the individual whiskers on the animal's muzzle, close enough to smell the musk of its fur mixed with the copper scent of blood, Bill realized he was holding his breath. The bear watched him inject the tranquilizer into its shoulder muscle without so much as a growl. Within minutes, its massive head began to droop, though its eyes remained alert and fixed on Bill's face. There was trust there now, or maybe just resignation, but it was enough. Working on the trap mechanism proved to be a nightmare. The device was old but well-maintained, with springs that required more strength than Bill's arthritic hands could provide. He used a tire iron from his emergency kit as a lever, throwing his full weight against it while praying the tranquilizer would hold. The bear's breathing had become even more labored, and Bill could see that shock was setting in. When the trap finally released with a metallic clang that echoed through the forest, Bill nearly sobbed with relief. The bear's leg was a mess of torn flesh and exposed bone, but it was free. Now came the real challenge, keeping the animal alive long enough to get proper medical treatment. Bill's field surgery lasted 45 minutes, working with veterinary supplies that were meant for animals a tenth of this size. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic, sutured what he could, and wrapped the leg in pressure bandages that he hoped would control the bleeding during transport. The bear remained still throughout the procedure, occasionally lifting its head to watch Bill work with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. It was during this delicate operation that his satellite phone finally connected, and of all the horrible timing in the world, Clara chose that moment to call. "Dad, I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk about—" Clara's voice crackled through the static, all business and barely contained frustration. "Clara, honey, this really isn't a good time," Bill said, not looking up from his suturing. Blood soaked through his shirt sleeves, and his back ached from crouching over the massive animal. "It's never a good time with you anymore, Dad. Look, I've made some calls, and there's a really nice place in Lakewood that has an opening. Sunset Manor has assisted living apartments with medical staff on site, and they even allow small pets if you want to bring—" "I'm not going to any damn old folks' home, Clara." The words came out sharper than he intended, frustration and physical exhaustion making him less diplomatic than usual. "Dad, you're 67 years old, living alone in the middle of nowhere. What if you have another blood pressure episode? What if you fall and break a hip? I can't keep worrying about you like this." Bill paused in his work, looking down at the bear that was watching this conversation with apparent interest. There was something almost amused in those dark eyes, as if the animal understood the absurdity of discussing assisted living while performing emergency surgery in the middle of a forest. "I'm not dead yet, Clara, and I'm certainly not helpless. In fact, right now I'm—" He stopped himself before admitting what he was actually doing. Clara would have him committed if she knew he was operating on a wild bear with kitchen-table veterinary skills. "You're what, Dad?" "I'm busy. Can we discuss this later?" The silence stretched long enough that Bill wondered if the call had dropped. When Clara spoke again, her voice carried the particular weight of a daughter who had reached the end of her patience. "Fine. But Dad, I'm serious about this. I've already put down a deposit at Sunset Manor. The paperwork is ready and they can have you moved in by next week. This isn't a request anymore. It's what's going to happen." The line went dead, leaving Bill alone with the bear and the crushing realization that his daughter was preparing to take away the last piece of independence he had left. The cabin, Margaret's memory, their shared dreams, all of it would be reduced to a small apartment room with scheduled meal times and mandatory social activities. The bear made a soft huffing sound that might have been sympathy, and Bill found himself talking to the animal as he finished the bandaging. "She means well," he said, securing the last of the gauze. "But she doesn't understand that some of us aren't meant for cages, you know. Some of us need the mountains and the sky and the freedom to make our own mistakes." The bear's response was to gently touch Bill's forearm with the tip of its snout, a gesture so deliberate and gentle that it made Bill's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Now came the seemingly impossible task of getting a 400-pound sedated bear back to his cabin for proper recovery. The journey back to the cabin took 3 hours and nearly killed Bill. Using rope and tarps from his emergency kit, he fashioned a makeshift travois that could slide across the forest floor. The bear, still groggy from sedation but conscious enough to help by shifting its weight, proved to be a surprisingly cooperative patient. Every 50 yards, Bill had to stop to catch his breath and check his heart rate, which hammered against his ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. By the time they reached the cabin, Bill's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain air, and his hands shook from exhaustion. The bear's condition had stabilized during the journey, but infection remained a serious threat. Bill converted his garage into a makeshift animal hospital, using furniture pads and blankets to create a comfortable recovery area. The space wasn't ideal, but it was warm, dry, and private. The bear, Bill had started thinking of him as Benjamin, though he couldn't say why the name felt right, settled into his temporary home with remarkable grace. When Bill brought him water in a large steel bowl, Benjamin drank carefully, then looked up at Bill with what seemed like gratitude. There was intelligence in those dark eyes that went beyond normal animal awareness, a spark of recognition that made Bill increasingly uncomfortable with his inability to place where he had seen this bear before. That evening, as Bill monitored Benjamin's vital signs and changed his bandages, he found himself talking to the animal the way he used to talk to Margaret during her final days in the hospital. About the cabin, about Clara's ultimatum, about the loneliness that had become his constant companion since Margaret's death. "The thing is," Bill said, cleaning around the suture site while Benjamin watched with patient attention, "your mother always believed that everything happens for a reason. And she used to say that sometimes the things we think are endings are actually beginnings in disguise." He paused, meeting the bear's steady gaze. "I'm starting to wonder if maybe she sent you to me." The next morning brought Clara, unannounced and armed with legal paperwork. Her rental car crunched up the gravel driveway at exactly 9 a.m., and through the kitchen window, Bill watched his daughter emerge with the determined expression of someone who had made an irreversible decision. She wore her hospital scrubs and carried a briefcase that undoubtedly contained his future as she saw it. "Dad?" Clara called, knocking on the front door despite having her own key. We need to talk. Bill glanced toward the garage where Benjamin was resting quietly. The bear's presence was impossible to hide. The garage door was cracked open for ventilation, and several 100 pounds of black bear was not something easily concealed. "Come in, honey," Bill called, resignation heavy in his voice. "Coffee's fresh." Clara entered with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to managing crises. She was a handsome woman who looked younger than her 54 years, with Margaret's eyes and Bill's stubborn jawline. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved through the familiar kitchen with the muscle memory of childhood. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday and Clara stopped mid-sentence, her nose wrinkling slightly. "What's that smell? It's like antiseptic and something else." "Probably just cleaning supplies," Bill said, though he knew the distinctive musk of wild animal was impossible to miss. Clara's nursing instincts were too sharp to be fooled. She followed the scent toward the garage, and Bill realized with a sinking heart that his secret was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. "Dad, why is your garage door open?" "It's 40 degrees outside, and you're heating the—" Clara's words died as she peered through the crack and saw Benjamin. The silence stretched for a full 30 seconds. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, staring at 400 pounds of wild bear that was calmly staring back at her. Benjamin, for his part, seemed more curious than alarmed by this new human. He lifted his massive head and made a soft chuffing sound that might have been a greeting. "Dad," Clara said, her voice unnaturally calm in the way of medical professionals dealing with psychiatric emergencies. "There is a bear in your garage." "Yes," Bill said simply. "A very large bear." "Yes." "Why is there a bear in your garage, Dad?" Bill sank into one of Margaret's kitchen chairs, suddenly feeling every one of his 67 years. "Because he was dying, and I couldn't let that happen." The explosion came exactly as he expected it would. Clara whirled around, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and terror in rapid succession. "Are you completely out of your mind? This is exactly why you need supervision. You're harboring a wild animal that could kill you without even meaning to. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? How illegal this probably is?" "His name is Benjamin," Bill said quietly. "And he's not dangerous. He's hurt and scared and alone, and he trusts me. His name is—" Clara stopped, rubbing her temples in the gesture she had inherited from her mother. "Dad, this isn't a pet. This is a wild predator that weighs more than both of us combined. What were you planning to do, keep him forever? Turn the garage into a bear cave?" "I was planning to help him heal and then let him go," Bill said. "Just like your mother and I always talked about doing." The mention of Margaret seemed to deflate some of Clara's anger, replacing it with the complicated grief that still lived between them. She sat down across from her father, and for a moment they were just two people who missed the same woman. "Mom's been gone for 3 years, Dad. She's not coming back to help you run a wildlife rescue center. And you can't do this alone. You proved that by nearly getting yourself killed trying to save one bear." "How do you know I nearly got myself killed?" Clara gestured toward his appearance. "You look like you've been hit by a truck. Your hands are shaking, you're pale as paper, and I can see dried blood under your fingernails. Plus, you're talking to a bear like it's a person, which suggests either a head injury or a complete break from reality." Despite everything, Bill found himself smiling. "You always were too smart for your own good. Smart enough to know that this situation is completely unsustainable." "Dad, I love you, but I can't keep worrying that I'm going to get a call from the sheriff telling me they found your body parts scattered across the mountainside." They were interrupted by a soft sound from the garage, Benjamin moving around in his makeshift recovery area. Clara tensed immediately, but Bill noticed that the bear's movements were stronger than they had been yesterday. The antibiotics were working and the wound was beginning to heal. "Let me show you something," Bill said, standing slowly. before you make any permanent decisions about my mental state." Against every instinct Clara possessed as both a nurse and a daughter, she followed her father into the garage. Benjamin was awake and alert, watching their approach with calm interest. When he saw Bill, the bear made a soft rumbling sound that was clearly a greeting. "Hey there, big guy," Bill said, approaching without fear. "How are you feeling today?" To Clara's amazement, Benjamin extended his snout toward Bill's hand, allowing the old man to scratch behind his ears like a dog. The bear's eyes closed in obvious pleasure, and he leaned into the touch. "This is impossible," Clara whispered. "Wild bears don't act like this." "No," Bill agreed. "They don't. Which makes me think Benjamin here isn't just any wild bear." That afternoon, while Benjamin dozed in his recovery area, Clara helped her father clean and redress the bear's wounds. Her nursing skills proved invaluable, and despite her concerns about the situation, she found herself impressed by the quality of Bill's field surgery. "You probably saved his life," she admitted reluctantly. "The infection would have killed him within days." "Your mother always said I had good hands for this kind of work." Clara paused in her bandaging, a memory surfacing unbidden. "Dad, do you remember that box of Mom's journals that we put in the attic after she died? The ones from when she was still practicing? What about them? I think we need to look at them. There's something about this bear that seems familiar, but I can't place what it is." They found Margaret's journals exactly where they had left them 3 years ago, wrapped in plastic and stored in a cedar chest that smelled of lavender and old paper. Clara had been too grief-stricken to read them at the time, and Bill had been too heartbroken to even acknowledge their existence. Margaret had been a meticulous record-keeper, documenting every animal they had treated over their 40 years of practice. The wildlife entries were separated into their own section, with detailed notes about injuries, treatments, and outcomes. Clara flipped through pages of raccoons, deer, hawks, and the occasional coyote. Then she found it. "Dad," Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Look at this." The entry was dated 15 years ago, written in Margaret's careful handwriting. "Male black bear cub, approximately 6 months old, found orphaned after mother was killed by poachers. Severe malnutrition, infected wound on chest requiring surgical intervention. Heart-shaped scar will be permanent but should not affect long-term health. Cub shows unusual intelligence and gentleness around humans. Released after 3-month rehabilitation. Note, drew heart on his chest with surgical marker before release. Our signature, so we'll recognize him if our paths cross again." Clara looked up at her father, then toward the garage where Benjamin was recovering. "Dad, that heart-shaped scar on his chest." "I noticed it when I found him," Bill said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. It's him, isn't it? He's the bear cub Mom saved 15 years ago." Bill nodded, unable to speak. The coincidence was too perfect, too meaningful to be anything other than what Margaret would have called divine intervention. "She always wondered what happened to him," Clara continued, reading more of the entry. "She used to say he was special, that he understood things most animals don't. She called him her heart bear because of the scar." The implications of the discovery settled over them both. This wasn't just any wild animal that Bill had rescued. This was a living connection to Margaret, a piece of their shared past that had literally wandered back into their lives when they needed it most. "So what do we do now?" Clara asked. Bill looked toward the garage where their patient was slowly healing from both old wounds and new ones. "We finish what your mother started." The crisis arrived on the 4th evening in the form of Jack Morrison's weathered pickup truck grinding up the gravel driveway. Bill recognized the sound of that engine immediately, a diesel Ford with a blown gasket that Jack had been promising to fix for the better part of 2 decades. Through the kitchen window, Bill watched his former business partner emerge from the cab carrying what appeared to be a hunting rifle. Jack Morrison had aged hard in the 5 years since their partnership had dissolved. His face was leathered by sun and disappointment, his gray hair thin beneath a stained baseball cap, and his movements carried the careful deliberation of a man who had learned to expect the worst from life. He wore camouflage pants and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, and his boots left muddy prints on the porch steps. "Bill?" Jack called, not bothering to knock. "We need to talk." Clara emerged from the garage where she had been monitoring Benjamin's afternoon medication routine. Her face went pale as she recognized the rifle in Jack's hands, and she positioned herself between the garage door and their unexpected visitor. "Jack," Bill said, opening the front door but not inviting the other man inside. "It's been a while." Not long enough, apparently. Jack's eyes were bloodshot, whether from drinking or lack of sleep, Bill couldn't tell. "I hear you're harboring a dangerous animal on your property. That true?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a forest fire, dangerous and impossible to ignore. Bill had known this moment would come eventually. Small mountain communities thrived on gossip, and a 67-year-old man nursing a wild bear back to health was exactly the kind of story that spread like wildfire through coffee shops and hardware stores. "Who told you that?" Bill asked, though he already suspected the answer. Old Mrs. Henderson from down the mountain had been complaining about unusual sounds coming from his property for days. "Does it matter? Word is, you've got a black bear holed up in your garage. Same kind of bear that killed my boy 5 years ago." Jack's voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the grief that still lived beneath his anger. The mention of Jack's son hit Bill like a physical blow. Danny Morrison had been 19 years old when a mother bear protecting her cubs had mauled him during a camping trip in the national forest. The attack had been brutal and fast, and Danny had died before the rescue helicopter could reach him. Jack's wife had left him 6 months later, unable to cope with both her grief and her husband's descent into alcoholism and rage. "Jack, I'm sorry about Danny. You know I am. But this bear—" "All bears are the same, Bill." Jack's grip tightened on the rifle. "They're killers, every last one of them. And you're keeping one like it's some kind of pet." Clara stepped forward, her medical training overriding her fear. "Mr. Morrison, I understand you're upset, but this animal is injured and recovering. He's not a threat to anyone." Jack's laugh was bitter and hollow. "That's what they said about the bear that killed my boy. Oh, black bears are usually peaceful. They avoid humans. Danny must have gotten between a mother and her cubs. As if that makes it better, as if that brings my son back." The pain in Jack's voice was raw and immediate. 5 years of grief compressed into a few words. Bill remembered the man Jack had been before the tragedy, his business partner for over a decade, a skilled veterinarian with a gentle touch and a quick laugh. That man had died along with his son in the Colorado wilderness. "This isn't about revenge, Jack," Bill said carefully. "This is about helping an injured animal." "Everything is about revenge when they take your child from you." Jack raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at anyone, but making his intentions clear. "That bear needs to be put down before it hurts someone else's family." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Benjamin hadn't chosen that moment to emerge from the garage. The bear moved slowly, favoring his injured leg, but his massive presence changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Clara gasped and moved closer to her father, while Jack's knuckles went white as he gripped his weapon. Benjamin stopped about 20 feet from the group, sensing the tension in the air. His dark eyes moved from face to face, and Bill could see the animal's intelligence working, trying to understand the threat level of this new situation. The bear made no aggressive moves, didn't rear up or show his teeth. Instead, he sat down heavily, like a dog waiting for commands. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered. "Look at the size of that thing." "His name is Benjamin," Bill said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "And he's not going to hurt anyone." "You can't know that. You can't guarantee that." "I can't guarantee that my truck won't break down on the way to town either, but I still drive it. Jack, this bear was trapped in an illegal snare for days. He was dying when I found him. If I hadn't helped him, he would have suffered a slow, painful death." Jack's rifle wavered slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "Maybe that would have been better. Maybe one less killer in the woods is exactly what this mountain needs." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a county sheriff's cruiser with its lights flashing but no siren. Deputy Sarah Chen stepped out of the car with the careful movements of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of calm competence that comes from dealing with mountain folk and their peculiar problems on a daily basis. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Deputy Chen said, her hand resting casually on her service weapon. "We got a call about a possible dangerous animal situation. Mind if I take a look?" The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Deputy Chen assessed the situation with professional efficiency, noting Jack's rifle, Bill's protective stance, and Clara's obvious medical background. When she saw Benjamin sitting peacefully in the afternoon sunlight, her eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her composure. "That's a big bear," she observed. "He's recovering from injuries," Clara explained, stepping forward with her nurse's instinct to provide medical information. "My father performed emergency surgery to save his life." "The animal is calm and non-aggressive." Deputy Chen pulled out her radio and called for backup, not because the situation seemed immediately dangerous, but because protocol demanded it when dealing with large wild animals. While they waited, she interviewed each person present, gathering information about Benjamin's rescue and current condition. "The thing is," Deputy Chen explained after completing her preliminary investigation, "keeping a wild bear on private property without proper permits is illegal in Colorado, even injured ones. The state wildlife department has specific protocols for this kind of situation." Jack saw his opening. "So you're going to confiscate it? Put it down?" "That's not my decision to make. But yes, the animal will need to be evaluated by wildlife officials. If it's deemed dangerous or unable to be released..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present understood that Benjamin's fate now rested in the hands of bureaucrats who had never seen his gentle nature or understood his unique history. Bill felt something break inside his chest, a grief almost as sharp as what he had experienced when Margaret died. "How long do we have?" "I've called Dr. Martinez from the State Wildlife Department. She should be here within a couple hours. Until then, the bear stays put, and everyone remains calm." The waiting was excruciating. Jack refused to leave, positioning himself on the front porch with his rifle across his knees like some kind of vengeful sentinel. Clara paced between the kitchen and garage, checking on Benjamin's condition and muttering about bureaucracy and common sense. Bill sat in Margaret's chair, staring out at the mountains that had been his home for over 40 years. As the sun began to set behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the property, Bill found himself talking to Margaret's photograph on the mantel. "I don't know what to do, sweetheart," he whispered. "I found him, just like you always hoped we would. But now they want to take him away, and I don't have the strength to fight them all." The photograph smiled back at him with that familiar mixture of love and determination that had sustained their marriage through 4 decades of joy and sorrow. Margaret had never backed down from a fight when she believed in something, and she had believed in second chances for broken things. The sound of Benjamin moving in the garage drew Bill from his conversation with the dead. The bear was restless, perhaps sensing the tension that hung over the property like an approaching storm. Bill walked outside and found Benjamin standing at the garage door, looking toward the mountains with obvious longing. "I know, boy," Bill said softly. "You want to go home. But first we have to get through this." Benjamin turned at the sound of Bill's voice and did something that made the old man's heart skip a beat. The bear approached slowly and gently pressed his massive head against Bill's chest, a gesture so unmistakably affectionate that it brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, with Jack watching from the porch and Deputy Chen maintaining her professional vigilance, Bill realized that some bonds transcend species, law, and even common sense. Benjamin wasn't just a wild animal he had rescued, he was family, connected to him through Margaret's love and 15 years of separation. The headlights of Dr. Martinez's vehicle appeared at the end of the driveway, and Bill knew their time was running out. Dr. Elena Martinez arrived just as the last light was fading from the Colorado sky, her state wildlife department truck loaded with tranquilizer equipment and restraint gear that made Bill's stomach clench with dread. She was a compact woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent her career making life-or-death decisions about animals that couldn't speak for themselves. "Dr. Clearwater," she said, approaching with professional courtesy that couldn't quite mask her underlying concern. "I understand you've been caring for an injured black bear without proper authorization." "That's correct," Bill replied, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his chest. "I found him trapped and dying. I couldn't stand by and watch him suffer." Dr. Martinez nodded, pulling on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. "I appreciate your intentions, but you understand why we have protocols. Wild animals, especially large predators, pose significant risks to public safety. May I examine the animal?" The examination took place under the harsh glare of portable floodlights that Dr. Martinez had brought with her equipment. Benjamin, still weakened from his ordeal but alert, submitted to the inspection with remarkable patience. Dr. Martinez checked his wounds, took photographs of his condition, and made detailed notes on a clipboard that would determine his fate. "The surgical work is impressive," she admitted, unwrapping Bill's careful bandaging. "You may have saved his life with this intervention. However, the bear shows signs of habituation to human contact that concern me." "Habituation?" Clara asked, though from her tone Bill could tell she already knew this wasn't good news. "He's too comfortable around people. Most wild bears would be extremely agitated in this situation, sedated, surrounded by strangers, being handled by humans. This one is acting almost domesticated." Jack Morrison had been listening from the porch, and now he stepped forward with grim satisfaction. "So you're saying he's dangerous because he's not afraid of people?" "I'm saying he's lost the natural fear that keeps wild animals and humans safely separated," Dr. Martinez replied carefully. "Bears that associate humans with food or comfort often become problem animals. They approach campsites, break into cabins, sometimes attack when they don't find what they expect." Bill felt the world tilting around him. "He's not aggressive. He's never shown any sign of violence or territorial behavior. That could change quickly, especially as he regains his strength. I've seen gentle animals become unpredictable when their circumstances change." Dr. Martinez finished her examination and stepped back. "I'm sorry, Dr. Clearwater. Based on what I'm seeing here, my recommendation will be euthanasia." The word hit the group like a physical blow. Clara gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Jack nodded with grim approval. Bill felt something fundamental break inside his chest, a pain that rivaled losing Margaret. "There has to be another option," Bill said desperately. "Relocation, a wildlife sanctuary, something." "Dr. Clearwater, I understand your attachment to this animal, but—" "No? You don't understand?" Bill's voice cracked with emotion. "This isn't just any bear. This is Benjamin. My wife saved his life 15 years ago when he was a cub. We have documentation, medical records. He's come home." Dr. Martinez paused, her professional composure slipping slightly. "What do you mean, medical records?" Clara hurried into the house and returned with Margaret's journals, flipping to the relevant entry with trembling fingers. "Here, June 15th, 15 years ago. Male black bear cub, orphaned, heart-shaped scar on chest. My mother treated him for 3 months before releasing him back to the wild. Doctor." Martinez read the entry by flashlight, her expression growing more troubled with each word. "If this is accurate, it explains the habituation. Bears have excellent memories, especially for positive human interactions during their formative period." "So he remembers us," Bill said, hope creeping into his voice. "He knows we're not a threat, which makes him more dangerous, not less. Dr. Clearwater, I've seen this before. Bears that were raised around humans often become repeat offenders. They approach other people expecting the same kindness they received, and when they don't get it—" Jack spoke up from his position on the porch. "Tell him what happened to the Hendersons' neighbor last summer. Tell him about the bear that learned to open car doors." Dr. Martinez sighed deeply. "A habituated bear in Jefferson County last year broke into 6 different vehicles looking for food. When a family tried to scare it away from their camping site, it attacked. A 12-year-old girl lost her arm before they could drive it off." The silence that followed was deafening. Bill looked at Benjamin, who was watching the conversation with those intelligent dark eyes that seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The bear made a soft huffing sound and moved closer to Bill, seeking comfort in the face of so many strangers. "How long do we have?" Clara asked quietly. "I'll file my report tomorrow morning. The decision will be made by the department director, but given the circumstances—" Dr. Martinez didn't need to finish. Jack Morrison finally spoke, his voice carrying 5 years of grief and anger. "Good. 1 less killer in the woods." Bill turned on his former partner with sudden fury. "He's not a killer, Jack. He's never hurt anyone. Neither had the bear that killed Danny until it did. That wasn't Benjamin. That was a completely different animal in a completely different situation. All bears are the same when they're ripping your child apart." The confrontation escalated quickly, 40 years of friendship destroyed by grief and misunderstanding. Jack raised his rifle, not pointing it directly at Benjamin, but making his intentions clear. Deputy Chen stepped forward, her hand on her weapon, while Dr. Martinez tried to establish control over a situation spiraling toward violence. "That's enough!" Clara's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone accustomed to managing medical emergencies. "This isn't helping anyone, least of all the bear." But the damage was done. Dr. Martinez had seen enough to confirm her worst fears about the situation. A wild animal at the center of human conflict, raised around people, defended by an elderly man who couldn't see the danger. It was a perfect storm for tragedy. "I'm sorry," she said, beginning to pack her equipment. "My report will recommend immediate euthanasia. The bear will be transferred to our facility tomorrow morning." Bill felt the last of his strength leave him. The combination of physical exhaustion from the rescue, emotional trauma from the family conflict, and now the prospect of losing Benjamin created a perfect storm in his 67-year-old cardiovascular system. The heart attack came without warning, a crushing pain in his chest that dropped him to his knees in the gravel driveway. "Dad!" Clara was beside him instantly, her nursing training taking over as she checked his pulse and breathing. "Call an ambulance, now!" The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of pain and confusion. Bill was vaguely aware of Clara performing CPR, of Deputy Chen radioing for emergency medical services, of Dr. Martinez helping to stabilize him until the paramedics arrived. Through it all, Benjamin remained nearby, watching the crisis unfold with obvious distress. As the paramedics loaded Bill onto a stretcher and into the ambulance, he turned his head toward Benjamin one last time. The bear was standing at the edge of the garage, and Bill could swear he saw understanding in those dark eyes, the knowledge that their time together was ending. "Promise me," Bill whispered to Clara as the ambulance doors began to close. "Promise me you won't let them kill him." Clara gripped his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Dad. I'll find a way." But as the ambulance pulled away from the cabin, carrying Bill toward an uncertain future, Clara knew she was making a promise she might not be able to keep. Benjamin's fate would be decided by bureaucrats and regulations, not by love or loyalty or the memory of a woman who had believed in second chances. The bear watched the red taillights disappear down the mountain road, then slowly returned to the garage to wait for a morning that might bring either freedom or death. Bill survived the heart attack, but barely. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of cardiac monitors, oxygen masks, and the sterile smell of hospital antiseptic that reminded him too much of Margaret's final days. Clara never left his side, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair and updating him on Benjamin's status whenever he was lucid enough to ask. The news was not good. Dr. Martinez had filed her report as promised, and the State Wildlife Department had scheduled Benjamin for euthanasia on Friday morning, just 2 days away. The bear was being held at a temporary facility pending the final decision, and despite Clara's attempts to find legal recourse, the bureaucratic machinery ground forward with inexorable efficiency. On Thursday evening, as Bill's condition stabilized enough for visitors, Clara made a discovery that changed everything. While cleaning out her father's truck to bring him personal items at the hospital, she found a manila envelope wedged beneath the driver's seat. The envelope contained documents that Margaret had hidden away years ago, legal papers establishing the cabin property as a licensed wildlife rehabilitation facility. "Dad," Clara said, her voice tight with excitement as she spread the papers across his hospital bed table. "Look at this! Mom filed all the paperwork 15 years ago. The property has been legally designated as a wildlife sanctuary since 2008. Bill's reading glasses had been broken in his collapse, so Clara read the documents aloud. Margaret had been thorough in her planning, obtaining all necessary permits and inspections to operate a small-scale wildlife rescue center. The license was still valid, requiring only annual renewal fees that had been automatically deducted from a savings account Bill had forgotten existed. "She never told me," Bill whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed that morning. "All those years she spent drawing up plans, and she had already made it legal." "There's more," Clara continued, her excitement growing. "According to these documents, Benjamin's original rescue and rehabilitation 15 years ago was properly documented and filed with the state. He's not just any wild bear. He's officially designated as a sanctuary resident with lifetime protection status." The implications were staggering. Dr. Martinez's recommendation for euthanasia was based on Benjamin being an unauthorized wild animal in private hands. But if the property was legally a wildlife sanctuary, and Benjamin was a documented resident of that sanctuary, then everything changed. Clara immediately called Dr. Martinez, reaching her at home just as the wildlife official was preparing her final report. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Dr. Martinez initially skeptical but eventually convinced by the legal documentation Clara faxed to her office. "This changes everything," Dr. Martinez admitted when Clara called back. "If the bear is legally a sanctuary resident returning to his designated habitat, then my original assessment was incorrect. I'll need to revise my recommendation." But their victory was short-lived. The next morning brought news that nearly destroyed what little hope they had managed to build. Jack Morrison had not been idle during Bill's hospitalization. Consumed by grief and rage, he had taken matters into his own hands. Deputy Chen delivered the news personally, her usual professional composure cracked by the gravity of what she had to report. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," she said, standing awkwardly beside Bill's hospital bed. "Jack Morrison broke into the wildlife holding facility last night. He shot Benjamin." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She sank into the visitor's chair, covering her face with her hands. Bill's heart monitor began beeping frantically as his blood pressure spiked, and nurses rushed into the room to check his condition. "Is he?" Bill couldn't finish the question. "Benjamin is alive," Deputy Chen said quickly. "But he's badly injured. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, and he's lost a lot of blood. The veterinary team at the facility is operating on him now." The next few hours passed in agonizing uncertainty. Bill's doctors wanted to keep him sedated to prevent another cardiac episode, but he refused all but the minimum pain medication, insisting on staying alert for news about Benjamin. Clara paced the hospital corridors, calling the wildlife facility every 30 minutes for updates. The surgery lasted 4 hours. The bullet had shattered Benjamin's left shoulder blade and caused significant muscle damage, but it had missed all major organs and blood vessels. The bear's survival was attributed to his size and strength, and to the speed with which the wildlife facility's veterinary team had responded to the emergency. Jack Morrison was arrested at his home 6 hours after the shooting, still drunk and still carrying the rifle he had used. He offered no resistance and no excuses, telling Deputy Chen simply, "I did what needed to be done." But the most shocking revelation came 3 days later when Clara received a phone call that turned their understanding of everything upside down. The caller was Dr. Patricia Williams, a wildlife researcher from Colorado State University who had been following the news coverage of Benjamin's story. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Williams said, "I've been tracking bear populations in your area for over 20 years. I have GPS collar data and genetic samples from the bear that killed Jack Morrison's son 5 years ago." Clara gripped the phone tighter. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that bear was killed by hunters 6 months after the attack on Danny Morrison. I have the carcass photos and DNA confirmation. It was a 300-pound female with distinctive facial scarring. Benjamin doesn't match any of those characteristics." The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Jack had spent 5 years hunting the wrong bear, driven by grief to target any black bear he encountered. His son's killer had been dead for over 4 years, while Jack had tortured himself and threatened innocent animals in pursuit of a vengeance that was impossible to achieve. When Clara shared this information with Deputy Chen, the deputy agreed to arrange a meeting between Jack and the research data. Jack's response to learning the truth was complete emotional collapse. 5 years of hatred and purpose crumbled in the space of a single conversation, leaving him a broken man facing assault charges and the knowledge that his quest for revenge had been built on a lie. "I can't take it back," Jack sobbed in the jail's interview room, speaking to Clara through tears and exhaustion. "I nearly killed him for nothing. That bear never hurt anyone, and I put a bullet in him because I was too angry to think straight." Clara surprised herself by feeling sympathy for the man who had nearly destroyed their family. Grief, she realized, could make people do terrible things. She had seen it in her own response to her mother's death, in her father's retreat into isolation, and now in Jack's misguided crusade. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Jack's answer came without hesitation. "I want to help. However I can, whatever it takes, I want to help make this right." The legal complications took weeks to resolve. Jack pleaded guilty to breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and destruction of state property. but his cooperation with the investigation and his obvious mental anguish led to a suspended sentence with community service requirements. Community service that would be served at Margaret's Haven Wildlife Sanctuary. Benjamin's recovery was slower than his original healing from the trap injuries. The bullet wound had caused nerve damage that would leave him with a permanent limp, and the trauma had made him more cautious around humans. But gradually, with patient care from the state's best wildlife veterinarians and daily visits from Bill once he was released from the hospital, the bear began to show signs of his old trust and gentleness. The media attention surrounding the story had unexpected consequences. Donations poured in from across the country, enough to fully fund the construction of professional wildlife rehabilitation facilities on the sanctuary property. Veterinary schools offered internships, wildlife organizations provided expertise and resources, and the local community, initially skeptical, became protective of what they now saw as a national treasure. But perhaps the most significant change was in the relationship between Bill and Clara. The crisis had forced them to work together toward a common goal, rebuilding the trust and communication that had been damaged by years of grief and stubbornness. Clara took a leave of absence from her nursing job to help establish the sanctuary, bringing her teenage son Tyler to spend the summer learning about wildlife rehabilitation. The truth about Benjamin's identity, Margaret's secret preparations, and Jack's misdirected grief had revealed something profound about the nature of healing and forgiveness. Sometimes the things that seem like endings are actually beginnings in disguise, just as Margaret had always said. Sometimes the wounds that seem deepest can become the foundation for something stronger and more beautiful than what came before. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning that painted the Colorado mountains in brilliant golds and reds, Margaret's Haven Wildlife Sanctuary officially opened its doors to the public. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been Bill's isolated cabin and garage had evolved into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation facility with multiple enclosures, a veterinary clinic, an education center, and living quarters for staff and volunteers. Bill stood on the front porch of the original cabin, now serving as the sanctuary's administrative headquarters, watching the first visitors of the day arrive. At 78 years old, he moved more slowly than he had 6 months ago. But his eyes held a brightness that had been missing since Margaret's death. The heart attack had left him frailer, but it had also given him something he had lost: purpose. Clara emerged from the veterinary clinic where she had been checking on their newest arrivals, 2 orphaned raccoon kits and a red-tailed hawk with a broken wing. She had completed her veterinary nursing certification over the winter, working with online courses and hands-on training from visiting specialists. Her transformation from reluctant daughter to passionate wildlife advocate had surprised everyone, including herself. "The school group from Denver just pulled in," she called to her father. 23 fourth graders who are very excited to meet Benjamin. Benjamin. The bear, who had started it all, was now the sanctuary's most famous resident, living in a spacious enclosure that bordered the natural forest. His shoulder had healed well, though he would always carry a slight limp from Jack's bullet. More remarkably, he had regained his trust in humans, perhaps understanding somehow that not all people meant him harm. The educational tours had become Benjamin's specialty. Children would gather around his enclosure while Bill told the story of the bear's rescue and recovery, weaving in lessons about wildlife conservation, habitat protection, and the importance of coexistence between humans and animals. Benjamin seemed to enjoy the attention, often positioning himself close to the fence where visitors could see him clearly. Tyler, now 17 and planning to study wildlife biology in college, served as the sanctuary's junior educator. He had spent the summer documenting the rehabilitation process with photography and video, creating a social media presence that had brought national attention to their work. His posts about Benjamin's daily activities had garnered hundreds of thousands of followers, turning the bear into an unlikely internet celebrity. "Grandpa Bill," Tyler called, using the title that had naturally evolved over the months of working together. "The news crew from Channel 7 wants to interview you about the anniversary." The anniversary? It had been exactly 1 year since Bill first found Benjamin trapped in that illegal snare. The date had taken on special significance, marked now as Second Chance Day at the sanctuary, a celebration of the power of compassion and the possibility of healing from even the deepest wounds. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in Jack Morrison. After completing his community service sentence, Jack had asked to stay on as a volunteer. His carpentry skills had proven invaluable in building the sanctuary's infrastructure, and his dedication to the work was absolute. The man who had once tried to kill Benjamin now spent his days maintaining the bear's enclosure and helping with his care. The relationship between Jack and Benjamin had developed slowly, with enormous patience required on both sides. Benjamin had initially shown clear signs of recognizing Jack as the source of his bullet wound, becoming agitated whenever the man approached. But gradually, through consistent gentle behavior and Bill's mediation, the bear had come to accept Jack's presence. "It's like he forgives me," Jack had said one day, watching Benjamin accept a treat from his hand for the first time. "I don't deserve it, but he forgives me anyway." The sanctuary now housed 15 permanent residents, animals that could not be released due to injuries or excessive habituation to humans, and served as a rehabilitation center for dozens of others each year. The success stories were remarkable. Eagles that had been shot learning to fly again, bear cubs orphaned by vehicle strikes growing strong enough to return to the wild, and countless smaller animals given second chances at life. But beyond the animal welfare mission, the sanctuary had become something Margaret had never quite envisioned, a healing place for humans as well. Visitors often arrived carrying their own forms of grief and loss, finding comfort in the stories of recovery and resilience they witnessed. School groups learned about environmental responsibility. Families dealing with trauma found hope in the sanctuary's message that broken things could be made whole again. The dedication ceremony that morning drew a crowd of over 300 people. State wildlife officials, local politicians, veterinary professionals, and members of the community gathered to celebrate what had grown from one old man's refusal to let a suffering animal die. Dr. Martinez, who had initially recommended Benjamin's euthanasia, now served on the sanctuary's advisory board and spoke movingly about the importance of second chances in conservation work. "A year ago, Dr. Martinez told the crowd, "I made a recommendation based on protocol and past experience. I believed that Benjamin posed a threat to public safety because of his habituation to humans. I was wrong. Not about the science, but about the possibilities. This sanctuary has proven that with proper care, understanding, and commitment, the relationship between humans and wildlife can be something beautiful rather than something dangerous." The ceremony's most emotional moment came when Bill unveiled the sanctuary's memorial wall, a granite monument inscribed with the names of animals they had lost despite their best efforts, and at the center, Margaret's name with the inscription, "She believed every creature deserved a second chance, and her faith made this possible." Clara found herself crying as she watched her father trace Margaret's name with his finger. The grief would always be there, but it had transformed from something that isolated him into something that connected him to every animal they saved, every family they helped, every visitor who left with a deeper understanding of their responsibility to the natural world. As the formal ceremony concluded and visitors began touring the facilities, Bill made his way to Benjamin's enclosure for their daily interaction. The bear was waiting at the fence, as he always was at this time of day, ready for what had become their private ritual. "Hey there, big guy," Bill said softly, extending his hand toward the fence. Benjamin approached and gently touched his nose to Bill's palm, a greeting that had evolved over months of patient trust building. They stood together for several minutes, an old man and an ancient soul in a bear's body, connected by Margaret's love and by their shared journey through pain toward healing. Benjamin's dark eyes held the same intelligence and gentleness that had struck Bill during that first desperate encounter in the forest. But now there was something else. Contentment, perhaps, or simply the peace that comes from being exactly where one belongs. "She would have loved this," Bill whispered, and Benjamin made a soft, huffing sound that Bill chose to interpret as agreement. Clara approached with Tyler and a small group of the day's visitors, a family with 2 young children who had driven from Kansas specifically to meet Benjamin and learn about wildlife conservation. The parents had explained that their daughter was struggling with anxiety following her grandmother's death, and they hoped the sanctuary's message of healing might provide comfort. Bill watched as Benjamin positioned himself where the children could see him clearly, as if he understood his role as both teacher and symbol of hope. The little girl pressed her face against the viewing barrier, her eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "Is he really the same bear your wife saved when he was little?" she asked. "He is," Bill confirmed, "and he came back to us when we needed him most." "Like a miracle?" Bill considered the question carefully. The series of coincidences that had led to Benjamin's return, the illegal trap placed exactly where Bill would find it, the bear's survival through days of suffering, the rediscovery of Margaret's hidden legal work, could indeed be called miraculous. But perhaps the real miracle was simpler, the capacity for love to transcend species, time, and even death. "Yes," he said finally, "like a miracle." As the sun set over the sanctuary that evening, painting the mountain peaks in shades of pink and gold, 3 generations of the Clearwater family sat on the cabin's front porch, planning their future. Bill would continue as the sanctuary's director for as long as his health allowed. Clara had already submitted her resignation from the Denver hospital and would take over operations next year. Tyler had deferred his college acceptance for a gap year, choosing instead to develop the sanctuary's educational programs. The cycle of healing that had begun with Margaret's compassion for an orphaned bear cub would continue, carried forward by her family and extended to every creature that found refuge in this place she had dreamed into existence. Benjamin had come home, and in doing so, he had shown them all what home really meant. Not just a place, but a purpose, a connection, a commitment to something larger than oneself. In his enclosure, Benjamin settled into his evening routine, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day of gentle human interaction, adequate food, medical care if needed, and the constant background presence of the family that had claimed him as their own. He was exactly where he belonged, and he was loved. The circle was complete. Sometimes life brings us to our knees, through loss, loneliness, or feeling like our purpose has vanished with the people we've loved. Bill Clearwater thought his story was over when Margaret died, leaving him with nothing but empty rooms and broken dreams. But sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise. When he found Benjamin trapped and dying, Bill discovered that healing others can heal ourselves. The wildlife sanctuary they built together became more than just a place for injured animals. It became proof that it's never too late to fulfill the dreams we thought were lost forever. Margaret's vision lived on, not because Bill was strong enough to carry it alone, but because he was brave enough to accept help from his daughter, forgive old enemies, and trust that broken things can be made beautiful again. Every animal they saved was a reminder that second chances are real, that love multiplies when shared, and that the legacy we leave isn't found in what we accomplish alone, but in how we lift each other up. Have you ever discovered that your greatest loss, led to your most meaningful purpose? What dreams are you still carrying that might need just one more chance to bloom? Share your story below. We'd love to hear how you found new beginnings.